Well, I have notes. I brought notes for the first time because so many things happened today. I got to remember to say this, and I got to remember to say this, and I'll remember to say none of it. First of all, if you had dinner, I don't care if you go to Bubba's or not, that chicken was pretty spiffy. And there was so much of it, I saw lots of to-go boxes going too. So I think everybody got their $15 worth. So Joni, thank you wherever she is. They do such a great job. The second thing is, of course, I always talk about this. I walked in today and I told one of the ladies at the front, I said, you know what I'm thinking? Maybe we should move this series to October. Who wants to be out when it's a heat index of 107? And June has been such a bully that I decided to say something to July. And if Jackson can put it up there for me. That's what I'm hoping is going to happen starting next week. All right, so there's that. We won't talk about the weather anymore. Now, Dottie Pirtle told me that she has brought a bunch of her friends from Legacy Midtown. And what's really amazing to me is that we're so glad to have of you, all you guys, and that even given the fact that she's married to Rod, you'll still come. All right, so glad you're here, and we love it when people from the church bring other people to this series, and that's why we have 750 people here this evening and have had nearly that many every week. It's kind of cool. And when I think back to, as I said last week, 28 years ago when we would have 150, 175 on a good night, and now it's just crazy. So we're really happy about that. So I found something today, and I think he'll get a kick out of this before I turn this over to Amy Berry. And I just wrote this down, and he'll tell you, or I'll tell you where it came from. Dave was the leader of the Watchdog Nation, showing Americans the path to salvation. He taught them to fight, to stand up, and resist. Against injustice and scams, they would persist. So I was looking at the Dallas Morning News, and there was a Dave Lieber article from a couple of days ago, right? Yesterday, maybe, something like that. And it's about AI and chat GPI and all that stuff that very few of us understand. So hopefully he'll explain a little bit when he gets up here. But what I really want to know, and I'm sure you all do too, is that when are these roads that every one of them is being worked on right now, wherever we drive, I want to be the guy that's in the business that makes those orange cones. Because that guy is sitting somewhere in a castle somewhere. So maybe Dave knows a little bit about that too. Anyway, it's 7 o'clock. I'm going to get out of the way. And I am really happy that we have Amy Berry with us tonight to not only welcome us and pray, but to introduce Dave Lieber. And just remember, after the show, like last week, Dave will be upstairs. Well, he wasn't here last week. That was Kathleen. Dave will be upstairs with his books. And I heard through the grapevine that there's a new book coming out from Dave on, hope I can say this, Don Meredith, which will really be cool. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to, I'm David Rejebian. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy Berry, and I'll see you after the show.
Thank you, David Rejebian. Well, good evening and welcome. Welcome to the fourth program in the 2023 Rejebian series, and welcome to Highland Park United Methodist Church. I'm Amy Berry, the library coordinator here at the church. I also arrange small groups. So, if you want a good book or a good friend, please come see me. Now, first things first, let us bow our heads in prayer. Dear gracious Father in heaven, thank you. Thank you for giving us a land in which to live, where we have the freedom to come together to worship you, to discuss ideas, share different viewpoints, tell stories, learn. Thank you for all those who have put in the work, supplied the energy, and provided the resources to bring us the Rejebian program. Thank you for all those who have gathered here this evening and for our speaker tonight. Please continue to bless each of these individuals and bless this gathering. And Lord, please guide us in using our gifts in ways that are pleasing to you. We pray all this in your holy and precious name. Amen. Well, last year we had the privilege of seeing Dave Lieber's Ross Perot presentation on this very stage. Dave shed a lot of light on Ross Sr.'s life, highlighting that the man's story is primarily a story about love. After that delightful treat, I was thrilled to learn that Dave would be returning this year to tell us all about Amon G. Carter Sr. Now, if you haven't read it yet, do yourself a favor and grab a copy of this book, authored by tonight's speaker. You can purchase one upstairs after the presentation, and Dave will sign it. The book is a companion piece to Dave's award-winning theatrical production by the same name, but more about that in a second. Our speaker this evening is on a mission. Dave Lieber is showing Texans why 68 years after Amon Carter died, this is still Amon's world. Amon Carter owned the newspaper, the radio station, and the TV station. Mr. Fort Worth ran the town for 50 years. Dave Lieber never worked for Amon, but he worked at his newspaper as a columnist for 20 years. Now, you may know that Amon famously hated Dallas. Dave now does something Amon would despise. He's the watchdog columnist at the Dallas Morning News. Dave has written a hit comedy play about Amon that has been performed 52 times. 3 weeks ago, it was performed at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. No surprise to hear the play won Best New Play by a local playwright in DFW, or as Amon would say, FWD. Let's find out tonight why Amon Carter is the Alexander Hamilton of North Texas. And without further ado, let's give a Texas-sized Rejebian welcome to Dave Lieber.
Thank you. Very nice. Thanks. Well, I want to start off with a promise. For the next hour, we are living in a Thomas J. Henry free zone. There will be no commercials, okay? I also want to say hello to the balcony. I never get to speak to balconies, so this is great. This is the third time that I've presented at the Rejebian series, and oh man, this is a historic church. I consider this the premier speaking event in North Texas. And I bring a friend with me whenever I do a Rejebian group, and that would be Ermont's Rejebian. I never met her, but what she left, her legacy, there's probably 100 book review clubs in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which educates, enlightens, and entertains. And so I'm just going to put her here because she's going to be with me tonight. So let's talk about Amon Carter. When I wrote this play a few years ago, I never thought it would get performed. Who would want to watch a play that some guy like me wrote about a guy that nobody's ever heard of? They call him Amon Carter. I mean, there's been 1 million people move into Tarrant County, but people just don't know who he is. His name hovers. But then I started reading about him, and I thought, wow, this would make a great play. And it took a while, but here we are. And so I told the director of the play that I needed to have a time machine develop because Amon's going to travel in the different decades, the 20s, the 40s, the 30s, the 50s. And I actually brought the time machine with me tonight because I thought we could do some time travel. I don't know how you feel about that. Is everybody cool with the time travel? Okay. So I put it in here. Let's see what we got here. There we go. Come on. All right, here it is. Now, what is this? What do we call this? Right, but what did Amon Carter call it? The shady oak. He gave this shady oak hat to everybody he wanted to impress, to presidents, to kings, to prime ministers, to football teams that won. You got this hat, you were part of Amon's army. And now they call it the open road hat. They call it the LBJ hat. And it's kind of coming back with punk rockers. They kind of like to wear it, you know? And so I said to the director, Connie Sanchez, how are we going to turn this into a time machine? And she said, we're going to have him shout out the year, and then it'll go on the screen. And then after that, we'll have lightning and thunder on the stage. And I asked Amy if I could have lightning and thunder, and she said no, so we're not doing that. But do y'all feel like doing a little time travel? Okay, here we go. 1936. Oh. Wow. So why did I pick 1936 to begin? That's right, the Texas Centennial. And so there's only one video clip I've ever seen of Amon Carter, and he's very upset about Dallas getting the Centennial. And so the video has him at the Fort Worth Club, and he says, you'd think Dallas invented Texas just because they bid higher for Centennial than any other city. But we're going to put on a show of our own and teach those dudes over there where the West really begins. And all the guys in the room went, ah! But what they didn't realize was they were about to be snagged in to spend $1 million because Amon was so upset that the Centennial was going to be at Fair Park. He decided to throw his own special party in 1936. They called it the Frontier Centennial. And he raised $1 million for it from all the suckers who he had given hats to. And he hired a guy, you probably remember him, you've heard of him. His name was Broadway Billy Rose, to be the producer of the show. And Amon said, I want this to be the greatest show on earth. And Broadway Billy Rose was married to funny girl, Fanny Bryce. And they used to call him Mr. Fanny Bryce. So this was an opportunity to come and make a name for himself. So he comes to Fort Worth, he meets with Amon Carter, and Amon says, I will give you let's see, what was it, $1,000 a day for 100 days, which works out to about $3.4 million. And they built a theater. What was it called? Very good, Casa Mañana. And they had a moat with a river around it, and the stage revolved, and they had all these dancing girls and everything. But it wasn't working. It wasn't good enough to beat Dallas, so they had to go out and hire one of the most famous female performers of the era. Who would that be? Sally Rand. Sally Rand, as the actor in the play says, you all know your smut. What did Sally Rand do for a living? Okay, I heard 400 people just say stripper, and you're right, but she would call herself a fan dancer, a bubble dancer, a balloon dancer. So there's a picture of her welcoming, of Billy Rose welcoming her off the plane, and she's wearing a skirt down to her ankles. And they take her to the Tarrant County Courthouse where they give her the key to the county. Who do you think made that possible? Right? And I told my county commissioner, I said, did you know that 67 years ago, your colleagues on the county commission gave the key to the county to a stripper? He said, we ain't doing that no more. So they built a pavilion for her near Casa Mañana, and it charged 25 cents, and the title was Sally Rand's Dude Ranch, and they crossed out the D and they made it Sally Rand's Nude Ranch. And there was a sign outside that I did not understand for the first 10 years I worked on this project. The sign said, "Welcome to the only educational exhibit on the grounds." And I thought that was a joke, but I finally figured out what it was. It was an alibi. Because Mom and Dad and the kids would be walking, and Mom would go, "Oh, look, Dad's going to go into the only educational exhibit in the grounds. And would you like to go with me to the carnival, the Midway, and play?" And the kids, "Oh, yeah, let's go." So Dad would get to go see the show. So Amon Carter was so obsessed with beating Dallas that he bought a neon sign across the street from the opening of Fair Park. And the sign said, go to Fort Worth, 45 minutes west for Wild and Whoopee. Now, I don't know about you, but I can handle wild, but not whoopee, you know. And so he put these cartoons of naked women on billboards all over the Southwest. And it said, "Go to Dallas for education, but come to Fort Worth for entertainment." I didn't really know. I mean, I read the story about Sally Rand, but I didn't really know it in my heart until I went to the TCU library, where they have 444 boxes of Amon Carter's papers. And I went through these boxes, and I found something that really was amazing. I found the actual program for Billy Rose's Casa Mañana. And it's amazing, really, because the first page has a picture of Billy, and it says, "I'm the #1 showman." And then you have the next page has all the songs and who sang them. And then the next page starts off with women, okay? Now, my wife said to me, "You should really have a thumb drive and put these slides up on the screen." And I said, "Karen, this is a church." Because before they had Photoshop, they had, what do they call it? Where they whited out stuff. Airbrush, thank you, right. So they airbrushed, I hope you can't see this. But this is 20 years before Hugh Hefner came along, and this is the official program, okay? And so it just keeps on going. I mean, it's like every page has naked women on them. And I'm like, what is going on here? And it took me a while to figure it out. But then I realized what happened. Fort Worth is like the belt buckle of the belt, right? Excuse me, what's that phrase? The belt buckle, right. So, right, and so Fort Worth is there's a church on every corner except for Hell's Half Acre. And, he puts out this smut. And people from all over the country are coming to it. And I thought, why? And then I realized this man owned the city. He owned the soul of the city. I mean, whatever he wanted, he got. He got Fort Worth to forget its morals, to beat Dallas and make a profit. And I thought, that's pretty amazing. So, if you were in Washington, D.C. at the Mayflower Hotel, like he was, getting ready to see his friend Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he would eat his breakfast, and then he would get up on his chair in front of the whole restaurant, and he'd say, "May I have your attention, please?" He'd say, "Hooray for Fort Worth and West Texas." And people would go, "That must be Amon Carter." And the reason they knew it was because he was best friends with Will Rogers. And Will would talk about him on his radio show all the time. And so people knew Amon Carter through Will Rogers. But there's some slogans that are associated with Amon that I'd like to share. But before I do, I just need to see a show of hands of How many people here are really from the city of Dallas, who live here or born here, grew up here? Okay, I have to apologize for what I'm about to say, okay? Amon Carter said, Fort Worth is where the West begins, which means Dallas is where the East peters out. Is that fair? I really have to apologize for this one. At his Shady Oak Farm over at Lake Worth, he had a sign on the restroom door, and it said, "Flush twice, Dallas needs the water." If you were mad at this man, who were you going to complain to? I mean, he owned the Star-Telegram. He ran it for 50 years. He started WBAP radio in 1922, and he started Channel 5 in 1948. Who were you going to complain to if you had a problem with him? You know, well, the one thing that people know most about him is that he refused to eat the food in Dallas. He would carry a sack lunch over here, and he would get up in a banquet and he'd say, "I'm not eating any of your food. I don't want to spend my money here. I don't get a shave here at the barbershop. I don't get gas." He carried gas in the back of his car in a little tank. He said, "I won't spend any money here." And I adopted that. So tonight I brought my sack lunch. Y'all wanted me to go eat dinner with you and everything. I'm not spending my money here. No, that's... So, you know, he called, you call Dallas Big D. He called Dallas Little D. So, you know, I've been fantasizing about where to take this story. And most of you are probably familiar with the king of TV right now, Taylor Sheridan. He does Yellowstone and all these westerns and stuff on Paramount. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if Taylor Sheridan picked up and did the Amon Carter story? This is just a fantasy that I have. And I realized all the elements of a great TV show are in this man's life. For example, you got to have love. And this man loved. He loved two things in particular. He loved Fort Worth more than any other city, and he loved West Texas, which he called the prettiest backyard a city ever had, because his newspaper went out to West Texas. Not only did he love Fort Worth and West Texas, but he loved women. He was married 3 times. No, not to the same women at the same, different times, different women. The first wife he had, she divorced him. They were in their 20s. I hate this phrase, but she was the starter wife. And she divorced him because she said he's got a giant ego and he's never home, and when he's home, it's all about him. The second wife, Nanetta, she was married to him during World War II, and she helped him start the foundation. But she said, "I can't stand being married to the Chamber of Commerce." The third wife was 25 years younger than him. Now, in the 1930s and 40s, you didn't get divorced once, let alone twice, let alone marry a 25-year-old woman. But what do people say? They talked about it, but again, who are you going to complain to? Because he ran the city, you know? Okay, so TV shows got to have love, but they also got to have lust. And I'm not an expert on his lust, but I know a couple of things. One of them is a rumor that he saw Sally Rand perform 60 times. Okay? 60 times. Second thing I know about him is he had a suite at the Fort Worth Club, which he ran for 45 years. And the suite was 10G. And he would go in that suite, hang out, drink, play poker with his buddies. And my wife, Karen, she said, if a man's got to have an apartment downtown, you know there's a problem, you know? Let's see. And now in this story of Amon Carter, we would have celebrities because he was a collector of celebrities. The way people collect stamps and coins back then, he collected famous people. If you came to Fort Worth, he grabbed you. He put you on the front page of the New York Times. The New York Times, sorry. He put you on the front page of the Dallas. Where do I work? He'd put you on the front page of the Star-Telegram. He'd put you on WBAP radio, and later on he'd put you on TV. And he had all these great friends like, Charles Lindbergh and Babe Ruth and Dwight Eisenhower, Gary Cooper, Bob Hope, Jimmy Durante, the Mellons, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts. So he had a collection of celebrities. He was a groupie. So they would all make appearances in the Amon Carter TV show that I'm fantasizing about. Okay, so you can't do a TV show about a Texan without it being about oil, right? So he decided to follow all his buddies and go out and start drilling for oil. And he was the worst oil driller there ever was. He went like 99 times without ever getting any oil. And people made fun of him, and they said, "You're the only driller who never drilled." But then on the 100th time, which is when most people, they quit before that, on the 100th time, he struck the big one. And it was throwing out thousands of barrels of oil. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't poor. Up till this point, he was poor. He was so poor that he needed to have a peach farm on the Tarrant County, Dallas County border. And he would tell his friends, "Don't eat those Dallas peaches, they're no good." He also decided eventually to sell all those oil holdings to Shell for $17 million, which was the most money anyone ever paid for oil in history of Texas. Of course, this made things a little bit easier at the newspaper because he was known to raid the petty cash box until he developed his wealth. He would just take money out all the time to start the Rotary and the Kiwanis and the Chamber of Commerce and the Junior League and all the nonprofits in Tarrant County. He would fund them. And so he had a money guy named Bert the money man. And Bert went up to him and said, "Mr. Carter, when you take money out of the cash box, I cannot balance the newspaper's books. Will you please stop doing it?" And Carter said, "I can't. This is how I'm starting nonprofits all over town." And Bert said, "Well, then just leave me a note so I know what was taken." And Carter says, "I'll leave you a note." Next day, Bert opens up the drawer. There's no money, but there's a note. It said, "Dear Bert, I took it all. Amen." So now he had all this money and he had all this power. And what do you do with it? That's the question. Robert Caro, who's one of my favorite authors, who wrote the 4 volumes on Lyndon Johnson, he said, when you get power, you can do what you want because power reveals. So what did he do with his power? He decided to spend his capital on improving West Texas. Anybody here grow up in West Texas? It was hard. I mean, the way I learned about it was if you wanted to see a movie, you might have to drive an hour. If you wanted to get a beer, you might have to drive an hour. There was no college, there was no museum, there were no medical center, there was no parks, there was nothing for folks out there. So he decides that he's going to do all that. And the reason why is the Star-Telegram put out 12 editions a day, if you can imagine that. And they would take the West Texas edition and they would fly it in an airplane and throw the bundle out the window of the airplane so that the ranchers could get it. And let's see. He built roads, he built parks, he built museums, he built hospitals, and he built a college, which you may have heard of, called Texas Tech. Anybody here go to Texas Tech? So, I mean, he was the very first chairman of the board of Texas Tech, and he also was the first to receive an honorary doctorate degree, Dr. Amon Carter. And they even have something there called Amon Carter Plaza, which people who go to Texas Tech aren't really aware of that. But he was able to fulfill his promise to West Texas to bring them into the 20th century because, half of the world's oil came from West Texas back then. One of the things I really liked about him is he taught generations of Texans how to give. I grew up in this little island called Manhattan. And it's a lot different from Texas, right? I got free parking outside tonight, But his motto, his epitaph was his quote, which is, "A person must live with the community, not off it." And in Manhattan, they don't live with the community, they live off it. But he said, we've got to lead by example. And so in World War II, when his son Amon Jr. was captured by the Nazis, he swore that he would, if his son came back, that he would start a foundation. And he did in 1945, and that foundation has given out $750 million since then. So it's kind of impressive because the dude didn't have an education. He grew up, he was born in a log cabin in Wise County, and he left school in the 8th grade. And the reason why was because his stepmother, his mother had died. His wicked stepmother kicked him out of the house when he was 13 or 14 years old. And he didn't know where to go. He ended up in Bowie doing about 10 different jobs. He was a chambermaid at a hotel, so that's where he got to sleep and eat. He collected empty whiskey bottles. He worked as a pharmacist delivery boy. He would jump on the train when the train would land in Bowie for water, and he would have a picnic basket, and he would say, "I'm the chicken and bread boy. Who would like a chicken sandwich? They're 10 cents." And he would make about $2 or $3, and this was in the 1890s when that went a long way. But for a boy who never went past the 8th grade, I say that he was the most consequential Texan in our modern history, aside from Lyndon Johnson, because he did so much for so many people. And he brought $1 trillion worth of business to Tarrant County. $1 trillion, Bell and the bomber plant and all the different American Airlines and on. We'll get to that. So what I loved about when the play became a big hit was that it was just like Hamilton. We took a founding father and we brought him back to life. And the only difference between my play and Hamilton is $500 million. And a Pulitzer Prize, and 26 of the greatest songs I've ever heard. But the reason I really did it was partly because it was a love letter to Fort Worth. I wanted to be a newspaper columnist my whole life. I spent 22 years working my way up. When I finally got hired at the Star-Telegram, I said, whoever hires me and gives me this chance, I want to show them some love. So I wrote this play really as a love letter to Fort Worth, And when the play and the book came out in May of 2019, it also turned out that a professor at Tarrant County College, he had a book that came out at the same time. It was his PhD dissertation. So it was a little bit boring, but he gave an interview. And he said in the interview, he says, "I don't think we should canonize this man." I love that word, canonize. And I say to him, too late, Bubba. Because I made a list of everything that is named after Amon Carter, and it's a pretty good list. There, of course, is the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, right? And I'm sure most of you have been there, and it's free. Why is it free? Yes, because in his will, he said no one will ever pay. And 3 weeks ago, we put the play on at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. It was bizarre because it felt like I was going to his house to put on the play. Okay, then we have Camp Carter, which is run by the YMCA. And then we have, he's the only man who ever had an airport hangar, terminal, and airport named after him. There was Amon Carter Terminal. At first there was Amon Carter Hangar at Meacham, and then there was Amon Carter Terminal, and then it was Amon Carter Airport, which was Greater Southwest International Airport. We'll talk about that. So they closed the Amon Carter Airport, and they created, the runway is now called Amon Carter Boulevard. And let's see, I mentioned Amon Carter Plaza at Texas Tech. There's Amon Carter Riverside High School in Fort Worth. There's a stadium where the number 2 football team in America plays. What's that called? Amon Carter Stadium. There's a Carter Park Elementary School. There's Carter Blood Care, which is not named after Mr. Blood Care. There's Lake Amon G. Carter in Bowie. Karen and I went and visited it. And then my favorite one of all, there's a Amon Carter Peak at Big Bend National Park, which he created. And in the play, the actor who plays Amon, Kelvin Dilks, he says, "Wow, my own personal mountaintop. I hear the view up there is pretty swell." And I've been writing for 48 years, and I never got to use the word swell before, So what I wanted this play to do was to change the way people think about Texas. Because what I learned when I moved here was how different yous guys are from my New Yorkers. All right, all y'all. It's a giving, caring, volunteering, sharing, charitable, 501c3 state. It's not just line dancing and boot scooting and chicken fried steak with white gravy. It's giving and helping. And I wanted that to be the message of the play. And the producer said, quote, "Never in our theater's history have we seen such an outpouring of love and passion for a show." So the guy who plays him, his name is Kelvin Dilks, and he's done 52 shows. He's a Birdville School Board member. He's a retired teacher. And he was interviewed by Bobby Wygant, Channel 5. And he said, "You can't go to downtown Fort Worth and not feel the presence of this man. And he's been dead for 64 years. In order for us to understand Fort Worth, we have to understand Amon Carter, because that's where we came from." People say, "Well, why did you get so involved in a man who died long before you came to Fort Worth?" And it was because some really interesting things happened. First thing that happened was I got to the paper in 1993 to be a newspaper columnist there, and they call me in and they say, "Congratulations." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "We've just appointed you to the Star-Telegram Picnic Committee." And I've worked on 5 newspapers, and there never was a picnic. And I said, "Why do you want a columnist to be on the committee?" And they said, "Because we want you to begin to understand the culture of this newspaper." Amon had a picnic every year at Casa Mañana, and it's a tradition that we keep to this day. So I said, "Okay." So I got a yellow picnic volunteer shirt, and I worked on the picnic committee. It was all right. And then a couple of months later, they called me back in again, and they said, "Guess what? Tonight's newspaper night." And I said, "What is newspaper night?" They said, "That's where you go door to door and you sell newspapers." I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because Amon Carter used to make his employees sell newspapers one day a year, I think it was, so they could understand what it was like to sell the product." And I never had so many doors slammed in my face. Okay, so then the next thing that happens is Christmas comes, my first Texas Christmas. And I was a little sad, a little lonely. I went to go see the North Park Santa. You remember him? Yep. And I talked to him about fitting in and moving into Texas and all that. And he gave me great advice. And then my Christmas week paycheck came, and it was double. And I said, "Why is my check so big?" And they said, "Because Amon Carter gave everybody an extra week's pay at Christmas." And I go, "Wow, I like this guy." And he put his picture of his kids on the checks. It was really cool. Okay, one more thing happened that made me fall in love with this man. They said, "How would you like season tickets to TCU football for the rest of your life? Half price." I said, "Let me guess. The dead guy's paying the rest?" And they said, "Yeah, there's the Amon Carter Employees Fund, and he has put away all this money. So I've been a TCU season ticket holder for 28 years, thanks to him, All right, let's go on another time travel trip, okay? You ready? Okay, 1928. I love that. Thank you. All right. So 1928 was the first year that the Democrats had their national convention in the South since the Civil War. And it was at the Rice Hotel. And before he left, the Fort Worth Rotary, which Amon had started, made him take an oath, a pledge. They said, "Repeat after me. I, Amon G. Carter, do solemnly swear that while I'm at the Democratic Convention, I will not drink any of the giggle juice." Does everybody know what giggle juice is? It's the same thing as silly water. This is not giggle juice here. But Amon liked to drink, and when he would have friends at his house, he would give them canes. And they'd open up the bottle of the cane and all the liquor would come shooting out. So he takes the oath. He goes to Houston. He's having a good time, but he forgets about his oath. And so on the third day, something interesting happens. He's waiting for the elevator at the Rice Hotel, and it's not coming, and he's getting impatient. I mean, he's Amon Carter. He had what they call mad spells. He got upset a lot. So he's now upset in front of the elevator. So he pulls out the pearl handle pistol of the Tarrant County Sheriff who's with him, which the pistol was given to him by the Jacksboro Highway Mafia, but that's another story. And Amon takes the pistol and he shoots 3 times into the elevator shaft. Bang, bang, bang. And he screams out, "You dang elevator, get here now." And the elevator stops. It worked. The Houston Police Department show up. They say, "We hear there's been a shooting in the lobby of the Rice Hotel." He goes, "Oh, no, it wasn't a shooting. I took the butt of the pistol and I rocked it against the glass." And they go, they said, "You don't want to arrest this guy because he's Amon Carter. It'll go all over the world and it'll be really embarrassing, so let it go." So he lets it go. Now, anybody else in this room would say that was enough fun for one day, but he's still drinking. So he knocks on the door of one of the most famous writers in America, H.L. Mencken. And he says, "Mencken, let's play." And Mencken says, "I'm typing, I'm writing for the Baltimore Sun about the convention. I cannot be playing with you." And Amon goes, "Come on." And he goes, "No, man, just leave me alone. Let me work." So Amon goes over to the window. He pulls the curtain over. He pulls his own gun out this time, and he fires shots into a room in a hotel across the street, which turned out to be the meeting room of the Ku Klux Klan. And people are like, I don't know whether to love him or hate him for this. But this time, the Texas Rangers come. And they say, "We hear there's a report of a possible shooting. We're here to investigate." Amon has stashed the gun under H.L. Mencken's bed. They look everywhere except under the bed, but they do see a screen on the window which has 3 bullet holes in it. And again, someone says, "You don't want to mess with this guy. He's Amon Carter. It'll be really embarrassing." Well, Amon goes home and he denies that this ever happened. He lies to his family. He lies to the editors of the paper. He lies to the Saturday Evening Post. He said he never shot anything. But H.L. Mencken's memoirs come out 40 years later, and there's a whole chapter on this. And the screen window was with the bullet holes hung on H.L. Mencken's office wall for the next 40 years. I like to say that Aaron Burr shot Hamilton, and Amon Carter shot an elevator. All right, so remember before when I said he was responsible for $1 trillion worth of business? So the way he did it was, number one, stealing from Dallas, which we'll get to, but number 2, just taking the businesses from anywhere. Like he went to Sinclair Oil. Remember Dino the dinosaur? And he was at their big office in New York, and they had a map of the world there, and they had push pins all over showing where they had offices. So he goes up to the map and he looks and he sees there's a push pin in Dallas, but there's not one in Fort Worth. And he takes the pin out and he moves it. And they moved the company to Tarrant County. When I was looking at the old Dallas Times Herald articles and the Star Telegram articles about him and the Dallas Morning News articles, I saw that they turned the word Carter into a verb, as in we've been Amon Cartered again. Because every time he would steal a business from Dallas and bring it to Tarrant County, they'd say, "We've been Amon Cartered again." And there was one headline that said, "If you own any business in Dallas, you better tie it down because Amon Carter's coming to get it." He was the economic development director of Fort Worth. They didn't have economic director like they do now. He was the guy. And he outlasted 15 Texas governors and 20 Fort Worth mayors. I mean, he ran it all. He brought Carswell Air Force Base to Tarrant County and Bell and the bomber plant. And people were out in the hall were asking me, they said, "Why did he hate Dallas so much?" Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first reason is, well, I'll show you. he invited all the Dallas city councilmen and the mayor and the top business leaders to come to Shady Oak and have a big, let's get friendly, I feel guilty about the way I treated you dinner. And he's speaking to all the Dallas people as if they're his brothers. And it's going really well. But then like halfway through his speech, he remembers who he's talking to, and he has a mad spell, and he just goes off on Dallas. He starts screaming at them. And what happens next is the mayor of Dallas stands up and says, "Excuse me, Mr. Carter, but I brought my sack lunch because I'm not eating any of your food." And all the Dallas guys went, "Yay!" And when they got back to Dallas, they all told everybody what happened, and they were so proud. And that's how we have today the R.L. Stemmons Freeway, because Mayor Stemmons was the one who stood up to him, you know. So, but at that dinner, he went up to the mayor, and he said, "Mr. Stemmons, let me explain to you something. The reason why I go after you guys so hard is because it's a constructive thing. If I want to get something done in Fort Worth, if I want to get some of these people off their asses, all I do is remind them that you don't want those Dallas blanks," I'm not saying it in a church, "to get ahead, do you?" And, you know, they, of course, didn't want to lose, so that's how he motivated them to do stuff, by saying they're going to do it first, you know. His son, Junior, when Junior took over for him when he died in 1955, Junior ran the paper for 20 years. And then one day on I-30, driving to Dallas, he had a heart attack and died. And I always think about what that must have been like at the pearly gates. Junior comes up and says, "Dad!" And Amon Sr. says, "I told you not to go to Dallas." If I had to guess, though, why the fighting between Dallas and Fort Worth, which to this day we still see the repercussions. People that live in Hearst, Euless, Bedford, they brag, "I haven't been to Dallas in 41 years." You know, I know you don't care, but they do. It's still something ingrained in the water. But what happened with him? What was I going to? Oh yes, the real reason they fought, it was over aviation. Because if you were in Tarrant County and you wanted to fly somewhere, you had to go to Love Field, and he hated that. He didn't want anybody going to spend any money over there. So he fought and fought and fought, and finally he got Dallas to agree to partner with him on something called Midway Airport. And the reason why you've never heard of Midway Airport was because when Amon unveiled the plans, the front of the terminal faced Fort Worth, which meant the rear faced Dallas. And he said, "I'm out of here." They said, "We're not doing this with you, Amon. We're not trusting you. Forget it, forget it, forget it." So he spends another 10 years trying to get himself an airport. And because he was so powerful, he did. Greater Southwest International Airport, also known as Amon Carter Field. Anybody here ever fly out of there? Just anybody? Yeah, see, I'm not making it up, am I? No. And Dallas tried to stop the airport. So they went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court voted 9-0 to allow Fort Worth to have the airport. So this beautiful airport opens with all this gold leaf on the walls, and it only lasts 15 years, because then the Federal Aviation Administration comes in and they say to Fort Worth and Dallas, "We are sick and tired of you fighting. So we are closing Amon Carter Airport, and we are going to build the biggest airport in America," which they did, which is what? You are not paying attention. FWD. Gee. So I'm going through all these boxes, and I'm trying to figure out what made him tick. 8th grade education, brilliant writer, brilliant strategist, practically running the state of Texas. And I realized what his talent was because I saw all these mailing labels in the boxes. His talent was he was an expert at sucking up. They don't call it sucking up now, they call it networking. But there were all these lists of all these foods that he would send to people. Like at Christmas, he would send everybody a turkey that he knew, 200, 300 turkeys, and they said, compliments of Amon Carter, Where the West Begins, Fort Worth, Texas, Shady Oak Farm. And he would just include letters with loving messages, and it was really how he kept his friendships up with all these people. And I remember one time I was in Iowa, and I was just a few miles away from the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library. So I said, what the heck, let me go. And I walked in, and someone said on the loudspeaker, attention staff, we have a visitor. It's our first one today, please be nice. Has anybody here ever been to the Herbert Hoover Library? You have, okay. Yeah. And so I asked for the Amon Carter file. And what comes out is every year until Amon died, he sent Herbert Hoover a turkey with a note that said the same thing every year. A turkey is perfect for you, Mr. President, because you left the economy in a turkey. Yeah. Okay, this is something I found in the file that I had to read twice to make sure it was true. The White House said, Dear Mr. Carter, President Roosevelt appreciates everything you send to him food-wise, but you could please slaughter the animals before you send them. So, he was so powerful that in 1938, he brought FDR to Bowie, Texas. And Amon stood at the back of the train and he said, my fellow West Texans, I have brought to you our leader, our president, Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt comes up, gives a speech, and then there's a picture in my book of Amon Carter carrying a bread basket up to the train and saying, Mr. President, I'm a chicken and bread boy. Would you like a chicken sandwich? And Roosevelt said, I'd love one. And Amon said, that'll be 10 cents, please. And in the play, he holds up that dime and he says, I went from the log cabin all the way to the White House. That's the American dream, So I made a list of all the gifts that he gave FDR. And it was a pretty cool list. I mean, he was good at sucking up. Every year, he would buy the grand champion steer at the Fort Worth Stock Show. And he would have it butchered up, and he would take the choice meats. He would pack them in whatever was an igloo back then, and they'd take it to American Airlines, and they'd fly it to Washington. And that night, FDR would have his grand champion steer, and he looked forward to that every year. Amon noticed that in his fourth term of the presidency, Roosevelt looked very sick and he was losing weight and his belt didn't fit. And he said, Mr. President, would it be okay if I made you an authentic Western belt? And FDR said, I'd love it. And that's the belt that FDR wore until the day he died. Let's see. Oh, he went fishing a couple of times with FDR and Amon. They went fishing. And so Amon sends him a presidential lure, he calls it. And with the lure comes a letter. The best bait for you to use, Mr. President, is pork rinds. Pork rinds. I am from New York, and I don't know what the heck pork rinds are. Okay? Let's see. He knew that FDR liked to relax at night after the Depression work and the World War II work by going up to the residence in the White House and doing his stamp collection. So Amon made sure that FDR got the first day issues of every stamp, courtesy of Amon Carter. He sent a lot of food to the White House. He sent pickled onions and peaches and pecans, which in New York we call them pecans, and pink grapefruit. And of course, he sent him hats, lots of hats. And the hats he sent President Roosevelt were insured for life. I didn't know you could insure a hat for life, but all right, let's go on our last time travel trip right now. You ready? You ready? Boom! 1940. Okay, it's 1 year before Pearl Harbor, and the War Department says there's a war going on in Europe. We need to build a bomber plant because if we get sucked into World War II, we don't have any way to make planes and bombs. So they put out an RFP, request for proposals, for all the cities in America. who wants to build the bomber plant? And Amon handled Fort Worth. He said, they got the best people, they got the best climate, we got the best land for you. Well, he thought it had it in the bag, but he didn't. The second worst thing that could have happened to him happened. Not, the first would have been if Dallas got it. But you don't have a bomber plant here, you just have City Hall, you know. Tulsa, Oklahoma got it. Anybody here from Tulsa? Yeah, he couldn't believe it. So he launches this campaign to get the War Department to overthrow. He's calling generals, they hang up on him. He's writing letters and he's telling his secretary to sign the governor's name on the letters. Yeah, I try to like to do that and sign my name on a letter that says you'll get your property taxes lowered, signed Governor Greg Abbott. So, there's not much written about this secret campaign that's going on between Christmas 1940 and January 1941. But I did find a note that said that the good people of Tulsa didn't know what hit them. Because in early January, the War Department says, we've changed our mind. We're going to build that plant in Tulsa, but we're also going to build one in Fort Worth. And so everybody's really excited, and except for Amon. It's not enough that he got the plant. He decides he needs more. He calls President Roosevelt on the phone and he says, how is Eleanor? Will you give her my regards? Now, Mr. President, I have a favor to ask for you. Thank you for giving us the plant. Bless your heart for that, sir. But we need one more thing. And Roosevelt says, what's that? He says, if my plant's going to be 1 mile long and Tulsa's plant is going to be 1 mile long, mine's got to be bigger. Texas has to have the big of everything, the biggest everything. And Roosevelt says, well, what do you want? He says, I'll take an extra 30 feet. So when they built that plant, they always said that that's why we won World War II, because if we didn't have a second plant, we wouldn't have been able to fight in Asia and in Europe at the same time. So that plant was crucial. But when that plant finally did open in 1941, it was 1 mile long and 30 feet. And it was air conditioned, yay. And so what's the name of that plant today? Lockheed Martin, making the finest planes in the world. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up. Fort Worth is now the 13th largest city in America. And it's really because of two men, Ross Perot Sr. and his son Jr., so 3 men, and the man they picked up the baton from, Amon Carter, bringing in that $1 trillion worth of business, having 100 people move into that city every day. It's just absolutely incredible. So this is a story that I've been telling in the last couple of years, and especially to the newcomers in Tarrant County who do not know these stories. There's 5 different ways I've been telling them. The first is the hardcover book, which is really cool. It has 100 photos in it because he was such an egomaniac that he had a photographer go with him everywhere he went. So every time I write about something, there's like a picture of him. Let's see. I did an ebook for people that like to read on their phones. You don't look like much of a phone book reader to me, the crowd. I did an audio book with Tyler Cox, who ran Amon's radio station, WBAP, for many years. And I give these speeches to groups about Amon. And of course, the most powerful one was the play. 52 shows in 6 Texas cities, and now we have a chance to be at the Amon Carter Museum for forever. We're waiting to find out how that's going to work out. But I want to just end the formal part of my program. I have a couple of remarks after, but with just a few quotes for you to remember. In Hamilton, they sing, every other founding father's story gets told. Every other founding father gets to grow old. But when you're gone, who remembers your name? Who keeps your flame? Who tells your story? Who tells your story? I'm really proud that I've been able to tell this story. And I did find this one quote, which I really like, from a fellow named Paul Whiteman, who was the band leader at Casa Mañana. Like me, a New Yorker who came to Fort Worth and made friends and got things done. And what Paul Whiteman said is what I could say, how I feel. He said, I am a Texan because you made me one of you. I came down here sorely in need of spiritual lift. In Texas, I have found it. I have learned the meaning of the words friend and neighbor. And I have received a strength of uplift of spirit, which will go with me to the rest of my days. I am bound to Texas by irrevocable ties. I love that. And then, of course, he would say, hooray for Fort Worth and West Texas. And then he would say, you can't live with a city, you must live, you cannot live off it, you must live with it. I love that. I even have a shirt that says that. Okay, there's flush twice. Dallas needs the water. There's Fort Worth is where the West begins, which means Dallas is where the East peters out. And here's how I'll end this with my favorite line of his. If you ate dinner at his house, he had this printed on a menu, and he would expect you to say it like a prayer. He'd say he called it his college cheer, and he never went to college. Bring in the liquor, on with the mirth. To hell with Dallas, boost Fort Worth! Thank you. Thanks. I want to show you a couple of things that I brought that I have out there at the table. I've written 9 books. I've only brought 4 with me today. This is about 100 stories about life in Texas that I wrote before I became the watchdog. And it starts off with my marriage proposal to Karen, who's up in the balcony that ran in the newspaper. And there's great stories in here. How I took Emmett Smith to a teacher's classroom. She was dying. It was her last final wish. And the lady who was the perfect driver, she got an award from city council, 74 years old, never had to take her in an accident. I went driving with Miss Audrey, and she went through red lights. And I said, what's the deal? She said, it's only against the law if you get caught. And I said, that doesn't seem right. And she said, there was only but one perfect one, and he didn't drive a car. Some of you are interested in this. This is Watchdog Nation. Let's see, bite back when businesses and scammers do you wrong. And this is where I teach people how to be super consumers. And that's really a fun book. A lot of stories in there about how to be like a secret agent and beat AT&T at their own game. And of course, last year I presented this, Perot, Searching for Perot, My Journey to Discover Texas Top Family. And Mr. Perot, if I recall correctly, his funeral was in this building, right? And so I find this very fun to be here where he had his final resting place. So I've got all those books out there, and I've got a credit card machine, and I'll be happy to sign it for you. And if you can't tell by now, I'll just end it by saying this. I'm a New Yorker who's fallen in love with Texas. I just think it's a really cool place. And I hope I get to work at the paper for a long time. But if I don't, it'll be okay because I'm not moving. I mean, Thank you.
Dave, thank you. Hopefully next year we're going to hear about Don Meredith.
I hope I can finish it.
Well, you have to.
Yeah, I have to. Yeah. I have to.
So, thank you, Dave. Next week, we're really lucky because we have Sharon Lucky, and the book is Caleb's Crossing. And I'm just going to tell you right now, you want to be here next week. Everybody have a good 4th of July, and we'll see you Wednesday.